The gold locket around Rachel Whitfield's neck felt heavier than usual as she pushed open the door to Jensen's pawn shop. The worn velvet box containing her wedding dress clutched tightly against her chest. 6 months a widow, and this was what remained of her dreams, a beautiful gown wrapped in memories, about to be exchanged for enough money to keep her small homestead for another month. Montana Territory, 1883, was unforgiving to a woman alone. The bell above the door jingled as Rachel stepped inside, the familiar musty scent of old treasures and desperate sales filling her nostrils. Mr. Jensen looked up from behind his counter, his spectacles perched low on his nose. His eyes softened when he recognized her. The whole town of Willow Creek knew her story. "Mrs. Whitfield," he greeted, his voice kind but reserved. "What brings you in today?" Rachel swallowed hard, her fingers tracing the intricate beadwork of the box. "I need to sell something, Mr. Jensen." She placed the velvet container on the counter and opened it slowly. The ivory silk wedding dress lay nestled inside, its pearl beading catching what little light filtered through the dusty shop windows. It was the finest thing she owned, ordered special from back east when she married Thomas 3 years ago. "It's beautiful craftsmanship," Mr. Jensen said, lifting a portion of the fabric with respectful hands. "French lace on the bodice?" "Yes," Rachel whispered. I don't have much choice. The bank's giving me till the end of the month." Mr. Jensen's expression turned grim. "The drought's been hard on everyone, Mrs. Whitfield. I can offer you $15. Rachel's heart sank. It wouldn't be enough, not nearly. The mortgage payment was $25, and that didn't account for seed for the spring planting, if she could even manage to hold on to the land. "Please, Mr. Jensen. It cost nearly $100 when it was new. Surely it's worth at least $30. The pawnbroker sighed, uncomfortable with the desperation in her voice. "20 is the best I can do, Rachel. I'm sorry." The door's bell jingled again, and Rachel didn't bother turning around, too focused on negotiating for her survival. "25, she countered, voice trembling slightly. "Please." "The lady said the dress is worth $30, came a deep voice from behind her. Rachel turned, startled. A tall man stood just inside the doorway, trail dust still clinging to his denim and leather. His dark hat was pulled low, but she could see sharp blue eyes beneath the brim. A stranger she knew most faces in Willow Creek, and his wasn't familiar. "This isn't your business, sir," Mr. Jensen said firmly. The stranger stepped forward, his spurs making a gentle chiming sound against the wooden floor. "I'm making it my business." He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather wallet. "I'll give you $50 for the dress." Rachel's mouth fell open. $50? That's right. The man placed the bills on the counter. "But it doesn't go to the shop. The lady keeps her dress." Mr. Jensen looked between them, confused. "That's not how pawning works, mister." The stranger shrugged broad shoulders. "Then I'm buying it outright and giving it back to her. That satisfy your rules?" Rachel found her voice. "I can't accept that, sir. I don't even know you." The man finally removed his hat, revealing thick, sandy brown hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, yet not unkind. He couldn't have been more than 35. "Preston Xavier," he said with a slight bow of his head. "Recently arrived from Colorado." "And you are?" "Rachel Whitfield," she replied automatically. "Well, Mrs. Whitfield, consider it a loan if your pride won't let you accept a gift. But I won't be taking your wedding dress." Rachel stared at the money on the counter, shame and relief warring within her. "Why would you do this?" Preston's eyes met hers, and something in them, perhaps recognition of the pain she carried, made her breath catch. "Because my mother had to sell her wedding dress when my father died," he said simply. "Nobody stepped in to help her. I swore if I ever saw someone in the same position, I wouldn't just walk by." His gaze dropped to the beautiful gown. "Keep it safe. Maybe someday you'll wear it again." Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I doubt that very much, Mr. Xavier." A small smile touched his lips. "Life has a way of surprising us, Mrs. Whitfield." He turned to leave, then paused. "Where can I find you when you're ready to repay this loan?" "I have a small farm just north of town. Anyone can point the way to the Whitfield place." She hesitated. "But it might be some time before I can repay such a sum." "I'm not in any hurry," Preston replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Good day, Mrs. Whitfield." With that, he walked out, leaving Rachel staring at the $50 on the counter and a very bewildered Mr. Jensen. "Do you know him?" the pawnbroker asked. Rachel shook her head slowly. No, I don't." She carefully closed the velvet box, securing her wedding dress inside. "But I suppose I'd better find out." 2 days later, Rachel was hauling water from the well to her modest vegetable garden when she spotted a rider approaching. She shaded her eyes against the bright morning sun, recognizing the broad-shouldered silhouette even before she could make out his features. Preston Xavier. Rachel quickly smoothed her apron and tucked a stray copper-colored curl back into her simple bun. She hadn't expected him to call so soon, and she certainly wasn't prepared for company. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield," Preston called as he drew closer, tipping his hat. "Mr. Xavier," she acknowledged, setting down her bucket. "This is a surprise." He dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. "Hope I'm not intruding. I was passing by and thought I'd check on you." A lie, and they both knew it. Nobody passed by her isolated homestead without purposely seeking it out. "Would you care for some coffee?" Rachel offered, her mother's lessons in hospitality overriding her wariness. "That would be welcome, thank you." She led him to the small porch and gestured to a wooden chair while she went inside to fetch the coffee. Through the open door, she could see him surveying her property, the struggling crops, the empty corral where Thomas's horses once stood, the weathered barn that needed a new roof. When she returned with 2 steaming cups, Preston accepted his with a nod of thanks. "Your land has good bones," he commented. "But it looks like you could use a hand." Rachel's spine stiffened. "I manage." "I'm sure you do. But even the strongest among us need help sometimes." She sipped her coffee to avoid responding. After a moment, she asked, "What brings you to Willow Creek, Mr. Xavier? You said you came from Colorado?" "I did. Spent 10 years there raising horses." He leaned back in the chair. "I'm looking to start fresh somewhere new. When I heard about land opening up in this territory, it seemed like good timing." "And have you found property to your liking?" Preston nodded. "The old Miller Ranch, about 3 miles east of town. Signed the papers yesterday." Rachel knew the place, a sprawling property that had been vacant for nearly 2 years since old John Miller passed, and his children sold it off. "That's quite an undertaking for one man," she observed. "I've hired a few hands already. Good men." His blue eyes studied her over the rim of his cup. "Your husband, how long has he been gone?" The directness of the question startled her, but there was no pity in his tone, just straightforward inquiry. 6 months, Rachel replied. "Pneumonia, after a hard winter." Preston nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry. Was it just the 2 of you?" A familiar ache bloomed in her chest. "We had a son. He would have been 4 now." She turned to look out at the land, not wanting him to see the moisture gathering in her eyes. "We lost him to the same fever that took Thomas." A moment of silence passed between them. Then Preston set down his cup. "Mrs. Whitfield, Rachel, if I may, I have a proposition for you." She tensed. She'd heard propositions before, from men who thought a widow with a failing farm would be desperate enough for any offer. Seeming to sense her discomfort, Preston quickly continued. "I need someone to help with the household at my new ranch. Cooking, keeping accounts, things my cow hands aren't suited for. It would be respectable employment with fair wages." Rachel blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job?" "I am. You could keep your land, hire someone to work it properly, and have income besides. Or sell it, if that's what you prefer." "I don't know the first thing about running a ranch house," she admitted. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Can you add figures?" "Of course." "Can you make sure a group of hard-working men don't track mud all over clean floors?" A small smile tugged at her lips despite herself. "I managed it with Thomas." "Then you're qualified." Preston stood up. "Think about it. I'll be moving in next week, and I could use the help straight away." Rachel rose as well, uncertain but intrigued. Working for Preston would solve her immediate financial problems and allow her to keep her land. But it would mean being beholden to this stranger who'd already shown her unexpected kindness. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "That's all I ask." He placed his hat back on his head. "Oh, and Mrs. Whitfield, bring the wedding dress when you come. I'd like you to wear it for me someday." Before she could respond to such an audacious statement, he was striding toward his horse, leaving Rachel speechless on her porch with an empty coffee cup and a head full of confusion. 5 days later, Rachel found herself standing in front of the imposing two-story structure of the Miller now Xavier Ranch house, a small trunk of possessions at her feet. After much deliberation, she'd accepted Preston's offer, though his parting words about her wedding dress still unsettled her. She'd brought it along, tucked safely in its box, but had no intention of fulfilling that particular request. The house itself was impressive, one of the largest in the county, with a wide wraparound porch and tall windows. It had been well built by old John Miller in better days, though Rachel could see it needed a woman's touch after standing empty so long. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing Preston in shirt sleeves, his face breaking into a genuine smile at the sight of her. "You came," he said, as if there had been doubt. "I said I would," Rachel replied, lifting her chin slightly. He picked up her trunk with ease. "Come in. I'll show you around." The interior of the house was spacious but sparse, with furniture covered in sheets and a layer of dust on every surface. Rachel immediately began mentally cataloging the work needed to make it habitable. "The previous owners took most of the furnishings when they left," Preston explained, leading her through the downstairs. "I've ordered new pieces from back east, but they won't arrive for weeks." He showed her the large kitchen with its cast iron stove, the dining room that could seat 12, the study with empty bookshelves, and a comfortable sitting room. Upstairs were 5 bedrooms, the master for Preston, one that would be hers, and 3 others for guests or additional staff. "The bunkhouse for the hands is out back," Preston said as they returned downstairs. 7 men for now, though I'll be hiring more as we expand the operation." Rachel nodded, already planning menus to feed hungry cowboys. "When do they arrive?" "Tomorrow. I wanted you to have a day to settle in before the chaos begins." He set her trunk down in the hallway. "There's something else I'd like to show you." He led her outside and around to the back of the house, where a small plot had been freshly turned over. "I thought you might want a kitchen garden," Preston said, gesturing to the rich soil. "I had the men prepare it yesterday. Seeds and tools are in the shed." Rachel was touched by the thoughtfulness of this gesture. "Thank you. Fresh vegetables will be welcome. I took the liberty of having some supplies delivered from town," Preston continued as they walked back toward the house. "Flour, sugar, coffee, that sort of thing. If there's anything else you need, just let me know." Inside the kitchen, Rachel found well-stocked shelves. It was almost overwhelming after months of careful rationing. "Mr. Xavier, Preston, please." "Preston," she amended. "I appreciate all this, but I should be clear about something." She squared her shoulders. "I'm here as your employee, nothing more. Your comment about my wedding dress was presumptuous," he finished for her. "I apologize if I made you uncomfortable." Relief washed through her, though mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. "I meant no disrespect," Preston continued. "Only that I hope someday you'll have occasion to wear it again, whether for me or someone else." His blue eyes held her steadily. "I don't expect anything from you beyond what I'm paying you for, Rachel." She nodded, feeling somewhat foolish for bringing it up. "Thank you for clarifying. Now, I should start on dinner and making this place habitable." "I'll leave you to it," Preston said, moving toward the door. "I need to check on the new stock arriving this afternoon. We'll eat at 6, if that suits you." "It does." After he left, Rachel stood in the middle of the kitchen, taking stock of her new situation. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. This arrangement might allow her to save her farm and perhaps even prosper. As for Preston Xavier and his strange request about her wedding dress, that was a puzzle for another day. The following weeks established a rhythm to life at the Xavier Ranch. Rachel rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Preston and his men, spent the day keeping the house in order and tending to her growing garden, then prepared the evening meal. The work was demanding but satisfying. Preston proved to be a fair employer. He was often gone from sunrise to sunset, building his operation, but at dinner, he insisted she join him at the table rather than serving and withdrawing. "I don't like to eat alone," he'd explained the first night she tried to leave after setting out his meal. "Unless my company offends you?" It didn't. In fact, Rachel found herself looking forward to their evening conversations. Preston was well-read and thoughtful, with ideas about ranching that sometimes raised eyebrows among the old-timers, but seemed to be working. Under his direction, the ranch was quickly becoming one of the most promising in the territory. One evening, about a month into her employment, Preston returned later than usual. Rachel had kept his dinner warm, and when he finally walked through the door, she could see exhaustion etched in his features. "Rough day?" she asked, setting a plate before him. Preston sank into his chair with a grateful nod. "Lost 2 calves to wolves. And Simmons broke his arm when his horse threw him in the south pasture." "Is he all right?" Doc Bennett said it, "but he'll be laid up for weeks." Preston ran a hand through his hair. "We're already short-handed." Rachel hesitated, then said, "I could help." Preston looked up sharply. "With the ranch work?" "I grew up on a farm," she reminded him. "I know how to ride, and while I was married to Thomas, I helped with the cattle we had. I'm not afraid of hard work." "You already have more than enough to do here in the house. I could manage both, at least until you find another hand." She sat down across from him. "The truth is, I miss being outdoors. The garden is nice, but it's not the same as open country." Preston studied her face. "You're serious?" "I am." A slow smile spread across his features. "All right, we'll try it. But the first sign you're overworking yourself, we revisit this arrangement." The next morning found Rachel dressed in her oldest skirt and a practical blouse, her hair braided tightly and tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. Preston raised an eyebrow when she appeared in the kitchen, but made no comment as she packed food for the men working the range. They rode out together after breakfast, Rachel on a gentle mare Preston had selected for her. The day was clear and cool, perfect for the work ahead, mending fences in the north pasture and checking on a herd of new cattle. Rachel felt a freedom she hadn't experienced since before Thomas fell ill. The vast Montana sky stretched endlessly above her, and the rhythm of the horse beneath her was soothing. Preston rode beside her, occasionally pointing out features of his land or explaining his plans for expansion. "You've thought this through carefully," Rachel observed as he described the breeding program he was implementing. "Had a lot of time to plan," Preston replied. "I've been saving for my own ranch since I was 19. "That's impressive dedication." He shrugged. "When you know what you want, you work for it." His eyes met hers briefly, and Rachel felt a curious warmth spread through her chest. She looked away, focusing on the horizon. The ranch hands were already at work when they arrived at the fence line. The men tipped their hats respectfully to Rachel, though she caught a few exchanging glances as Preston explained she would be helping. "Mrs. Whitfield knows her way around livestock," he told them firmly. "She'll be working with us until Simmons is back on his feet." If any of the men had doubts, they kept them to themselves. Rachel was assigned to ride with Preston to check on the new cattle, while the others continued the fence repairs. As they rode side by side across the rolling grassland, Rachel found herself stealing glances at Preston's profile. There was something compelling about the quiet confidence with which he carried himself. "You're staring, Mrs. Whitfield," he said without looking at her. Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just wondering about something." "And what might that be?" "Why a man your age hasn't settled down. Most ranchers want a wife to help establish their place." Preston was silent for a long moment. "I was engaged once, back in Colorado." "What happened?" "She decided a banker's son offered more security than a man working to build something from nothing." There was no bitterness in his tone, just a matter-of-fact acceptance. "It was probably for the best. Emily wasn't cut out for ranch life." "I'm sorry," Rachel said softly. Preston shrugged. "It was years ago. And you? How did you meet your husband?" "Thomas came west to stake a claim during the gold rush, like so many others. When the claim didn't pan out, he turned to farming." Rachel smiled at the memory. "We met at a town social. He was terrible at dancing, but so earnest about it I couldn't help but be charmed." "You loved him very much." It wasn't a question, but Rachel answered anyway. "Yes, we had our struggles, but we faced them together." They crested a small hill, and the herd came into view below them, dark shapes against the green grass. Preston pulled his horse to a stop. "That's what I want," he said suddenly, his eyes still on the cattle. "Not just a wife for convenience sake, but a true partner. Someone to build with, to face whatever comes, together." The intensity in his voice stirred something in Rachel. Before she could respond, one of the ranch hands galloped up, calling for Preston's attention about a sick calf. The moment passed, but Rachel found herself thinking about his words long after they'd returned to the ranch house that evening. The next few weeks fell into a new pattern. Rachel continued her household duties but spent afternoons helping with the ranch work. She found she enjoyed the dual role. The domestic tasks grounded her, while the outdoor work invigorated her. Preston was never far away during these times, his watchful eye ensuring she wasn't taking on too much. Occasionally, she would catch him observing her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between admiration and yearning. One particularly hot afternoon, Rachel was helping to sort calves for branding when a sudden commotion broke out. One of the mother cows, agitated by the separation from her calf, charged toward the enclosure. In the confusion, Rachel was knocked off her feet, falling hard against the fence. Preston was at her side in an instant, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" Rachel winced as she tried to stand. "Just bruised, I think." He helped her to her feet, his arms steady around her waist. "That's enough for today. I'm taking you back to the house." Despite her protests that she could continue working, Preston was adamant. He lifted her onto his horse and mounted behind her, his chest warm against her back as they rode slowly back to the ranch house. Inside, he insisted on examining her ankle, which had begun to swell. His touch was gentle as he removed her boot and probed the injury. "Nothing broken," he pronounced, "but you'll need to stay off it for a few days." Rachel frowned. "I can't just sit around. There's too much to do. The house won't fall apart if you rest, and I can hire someone from town to help with meals temporarily." His tone brooked no argument. "Consider it an order from your employer." She sighed in resignation. "Fine, but only for a day or two." Preston nodded, seemingly satisfied. As he rose to leave, his hand lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary. "I don't like seeing you hurt, Rachel." Something in his voice made her look up sharply. The intensity in his blue eyes sent a flutter through her stomach. For a breathless moment, she thought he might lean down and kiss her. Instead, he straightened and said, "I'll bring you some dinner later. Try to rest." After he left, Rachel sat in the quiet parlor, her thoughts swirling. The concern in Preston's voice, the tenderness of his touch, these were not merely the actions of an employer. And her reaction to him was becoming harder to ignore. But was she ready? Thomas had been gone less than a year. The thought of opening her heart again felt like a betrayal of his memory. She glanced at the small trunk in the corner of her room where her wedding dress lay wrapped in its velvet box. Preston's words from their first meeting echoed in her mind. "Wear it for me." Rachel shook her head, pushing the thought away. She wasn't ready for that. Perhaps she never would be. The next morning, Rachel awoke to find a crutch propped against her bedroom door and a note from Preston explaining he'd had it made for her by the ranch carpenter. It was a thoughtful gesture that allowed her some mobility despite her injured ankle. Using the crutch, she made her way downstairs to find breakfast already prepared and Preston waiting for her. "You didn't need to cook," she said, surprised. "I've been feeding myself for years," he replied with a smile. "I'm not completely helpless in a kitchen." The meal was simple but well-prepared: eggs, bacon, and biscuits that were only slightly overdone. As they ate, Preston outlined his plans for the day, mentioning casually that he'd be in town for most of it. "Is there anything you need while I'm there?" he asked. Rachel thought for a moment. "Some more yarn, if Mercer's has any. The blue wool, like what I was using for that blanket. Consider it done." Preston hesitated, then added, "I was thinking of riding over to your homestead tomorrow to check on things. Would you like to come along? The ride might be good for you, now that the swelling in your ankle has gone down." The offer caught Rachel by surprise. In the whirlwind of adjusting to life at the Xavier Ranch, she'd visited her own property only twice, paying a local boy to check on things in her absence. "I'd like that," she said. "Thank you." Preston nodded, seeming pleased. "We'll make a day of it." After he left for town, Rachel spent the morning knitting in the parlor, her injured ankle propped on a footstool. The forced inactivity gave her time to reflect on the changes in her life since meeting Preston Xavier. In just 2 months, she'd gone from the brink of losing everything to having financial security and, if she was honest with herself, a sense of purpose she'd been missing since Thomas and their son died. Preston had given her that, along with his respect and friendship. And perhaps something more, something growing between them that neither had put into words. The sound of approaching horses in the late afternoon drew Rachel to the window. Preston was returning, but he wasn't alone. A woman rode beside him, elegant in a fashionable riding habit, her posture perfect atop a magnificent chestnut mare. Rachel watched as Preston helped the woman dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The woman laughed at something he said, placing a gloved hand on his arm with familiar ease. A sharp pang of something that felt suspiciously like jealousy stabbed through Rachel. She turned away from the window, chiding herself for the reaction. Preston was free to court whomever he pleased. Their arrangement was professional, nothing more. So why did the sight of him with another woman cause such discomfort? The front door opened, and Preston's voice called out, "Rachel? Are you about?" Composing herself, Rachel moved into the hallway, the crutch thumping softly against the wooden floor. In here, Preston appeared with the woman at his side. Up close, she was even more striking, dark-haired and fashionably pale, with features that spoke of good breeding and wealth. "Rachel, I'd like you to meet Victoria Harrington," Preston said. "She's just arrived from Boston to visit her uncle, Judge Harrington." "Victoria, this is Rachel Whitfield, who keeps this place and me in order." Victoria extended a gloved hand. "A pleasure, Mrs. Whitfield. Preston has spoken quite highly of you." Rachel accepted the handshake, noting the quality of the leather gloves. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Harrington. I hope your journey wasn't too taxing." "It was positively barbaric," Victoria replied with a light laugh, "but worth it to see this magnificent country. And to reconnect with old friends, of course." She glanced at Preston with a warm smile. "Victoria's father and mine were business partners back east," Preston explained. "We've known each other since childhood. When Preston wrote that he'd finally established his ranch, I simply had to come see it for myself," Victoria added. "We always knew he would succeed, didn't we, Preston?" Victoria was one of the few who believed in my Western folly, as her mother called it, Preston said with a chuckle. "She's staying with her uncle in town, but I've invited her to dinner tomorrow evening." "I'll plan something special," Rachel said automatically, her mind already running through suitable menus for entertaining a sophisticated Eastern lady. "Don't go to any trouble on my account," Victoria said. "Though Preston tells me you're a wonderful cook." Before Rachel could respond, Preston looked at his pocket watch. "We should start back to town if you're to reach your uncle's before dark." Victoria nodded. "Of course." To Rachel, she said, "I look forward to dinner tomorrow, Mrs. Whitfield." After they left, Rachel stood in the empty hallway, a strange heaviness settling in her chest. The familiar way Victoria touched Preston's arm, the shared history between them, the obvious comfort they took in each other's company, it all painted a clear picture. Victoria Harrington hadn't come all the way from Boston merely to see an old family friend's ranch. She had come for Preston himself, and judging by the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, Preston wasn't opposed to her interest. Rachel told herself it was for the best. Victoria was clearly Preston's equal in background and education. She was the kind of woman who would bring social connections and refinement to his growing enterprise. Not a widow with a failing farm and a heart still mending from loss. Still, as Rachel prepared for bed that night, she found herself opening the velvet box that contained her wedding dress. The ivory silk gleamed in the lamplight, beautiful and unworn since the happiest day of her life. "Wear it for me," Preston had said. Rachel closed the box firmly, pushing away the ache of disappointment. Some dreams weren't meant to be revisited. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Rachel's ankle felt much improved, and she set about her usual tasks with determination, pushing thoughts of Victoria Harrington aside. Preston appeared at breakfast, apologizing that their planned visit to her homestead would need to be postponed. "Victoria wants to see more of the ranch operation today," he explained. "I thought I'd show her the new breeding stock." "Of course," Rachel said, keeping her voice neutral. "I'll focus on preparing for dinner, then." Preston hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but ultimately just nodded and left to meet Victoria in town. Rachel threw herself into preparations, selecting the finest cuts of beef from the smokehouse and harvesting fresh vegetables from her garden. She polished the good china that had come with the house and found a tablecloth that, while not fancy, was clean and presentable. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Rachel had just enough time to change into her best dress, a modest navy blue with white collar and cuffs, before Preston returned with Victoria. Dinner was a strained affair, at least for Rachel. Victoria dominated the conversation with tales of Boston society and reminiscences of shared childhood experiences with Preston. Rachel found herself largely silent, acutely aware of her position as servant rather than equal at the table. "Mrs. Whitfield, this beef is exquisite," Victoria said during a lull in conversation. "You must share your secret." "No secret, Miss Harrington. Just good Montana beef and a hot oven," Rachel replied. Victoria smiled. "Such modesty. Preston, you're fortunate to have found someone so capable." "I count myself lucky every day," Preston said, his eyes finding Rachel's across the table. Something in his gaze made her heart skip a beat, but she quickly looked away. After dinner, Rachel began clearing the dishes. "Let me help," Preston offered, rising from his seat. "Nonsense," Victoria interjected. "I'm sure Mrs. Whitfield can manage. Why don't you show me that collection of Western paintings you mentioned?" Preston seemed torn, but eventually acquiesced, leading Victoria to the study where he'd recently hung several landscapes purchased from a traveling artist. Rachel worked in the kitchen alone, washing dishes with more force than necessary, as she tried to ignore the sound of Victoria's melodious laughter drifting from the study. When she finished, she slipped upstairs without returning to the dining room, unwilling to intrude on what was clearly becoming a private evening. From her bedroom window, she watched as Preston later escorted Victoria to her horse. The full moon illuminated them clearly as Preston helped her mount, his hands at her waist. Victoria leaned down to say something, her face close to his, and for a terrible moment, Rachel thought she might kiss him. Instead, Victoria straightened and turned her horse toward town. Preston stood watching until she disappeared from view, then returned to the house. Rachel stepped back from the window, a lump forming in her throat. She had no right to feel this way, this mixture of jealousy and loss. Preston had never made any promises to her beyond employment. If he chose to court Victoria Harrington, it was no business of hers. Yet the ache in her chest told a different story. Somewhere along the way, without realizing it, Rachel had begun to care deeply for Preston Xavier. And now, watching him slip away before anything had even begun between them, was almost more painful than she could bear. The next morning, Rachel rose early, determined to maintain her composure despite the turmoil in her heart. She had breakfast ready when Preston appeared, looking somewhat tired but cheerful. "Good morning," he greeted her. "How's the ankle today?" "Much better," Rachel replied, keeping her tone light. "I should be able to resume all my duties, including the ranch work, if you still need the help." Preston nodded. "I do, and I'd still like to ride out to your homestead today, if you're up for it." Surprised by the invitation after yesterday's postponement, Rachel hesitated. "What about Miss Harrington?" "Victoria is spending the day with her uncle." Preston poured himself coffee. "Unless you'd rather not go?" "No, I'd like to check on things." "Good. We'll leave after breakfast." The ride to Rachel's homestead took about an hour. They traveled mostly in companionable silence, though Rachel was acutely aware of Preston beside her. The warm June sun beat down on them, and by the time her small farm came into view, Rachel was glad for the wide-brimmed hat protecting her face. The sight of her property brought mixed emotions. The modest house stood as she'd left it, but the fields were overgrown, and the empty corral emphasized the absence of life. It looked abandoned, a monument to dreams deferred. Preston dismounted first, then helped Rachel down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to lean into his strength before stepping away. "It looks worse than I expected," she admitted, surveying the property. "Nothing that can't be set right," Preston said. "The structure is sound, and the land is good." They walked to the house, and Rachel used her key to unlock the door. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows, but otherwise, everything was as she'd left it. The simple furniture, the faded curtains her mother had sewn, the small shelf of treasured books all waited patiently for a return that might never come. Preston moved through the rooms respectfully, asking occasional questions about the property. In the small bedroom, he paused before a framed photograph on the dresser. "Your husband?" he asked, looking at the image of Thomas in his Sunday best, a serious expression on his handsome face. "Yes." Rachel stood beside him, looking at the familiar features. "That was taken just after we were married. He looks like a good man." "He was." Rachel touched the frame gently. "He worked so hard for this place. It feels wrong to let it go." Preston turned to face her. Is that what you want to do? Sell it. Rachel sighed. I don't know. Working at your ranch has given me enough to keep up the mortgage payments, but without someone to work the land properly. You could lease it, Preston suggested. The Jenkins family is looking for more acreage. They'd maintain it well, and you'd retain ownership. You've thought about this. I've thought about a lot of things concerning you, Rachel. The intensity in his voice made her look up. Preston was watching her, his blue eyes serious in the dim light of the bedroom. Victoria seems very fond of you, Rachel said, the words escaping before she could stop them. A flicker of surprise crossed Preston's face. Victoria and I are old friends. She's beautiful, accomplished, clearly from a good family. Yes, she is all those things. She would make an excellent rancher's wife. Preston's expression changed, understanding dawning. Is that what you think? That I'm courting Victoria? Rachel looked away. It would make sense. You have history together, similar backgrounds. Rachel. Preston stepped closer, his voice soft. Victoria came to Montana because her father asked her to deliver some papers regarding our old business partnership. Yes, we're friends, but there has never been anything more between us. Nor will there be. Hope fluttered in Rachel's chest, but she tamped it down. You don't owe me any explanations, Preston, don't I? He reached out, gently turning her face toward him. From the moment I saw you in that pawn shop, something inside me recognized you. Not just your struggle, but something deeper. Something that felt like coming home after a long journey. Rachel's breath caught. Preston, let me finish, he said softly. I didn't offer you a job just to help you, though that was part of it. I wanted you near me. I wanted the chance to know you, to see if what I felt that first day was real. His thumb brushed her cheek. It is. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. I'm still healing. Thomas hasn't been gone a year. I know, and I would never rush you or dishonor his memory. Preston's hand dropped to his side. But I wanted you to know where I stand. When if you're ready, I'll be here. Rachel nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. The possibility of a second chance at love was both terrifying and exhilarating. We should head back, Preston said after a moment. Storm clouds are moving in. Indeed, the clear morning had given way to dark clouds gathering in the west. They secured the house and mounted their horses, riding faster than before to beat the approaching weather. They were still a mile from the Xavier ranch when the storm broke. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them instantly. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by a boom of thunder that spooked Rachel's mare. The horse reared, and despite Rachel's best efforts to control her, she was thrown. Preston was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her in the mud. Rachel, are you hurt? She sat up slowly, wincing. I don't think so. Just shaken. Another lightning strike, closer this time, made both horses bolt. Preston cursed as they watched the animals gallop toward the ranch. They'll head for the barn, he said, helping Rachel to her feet. But we're going to get very wet walking back. They were already drenched, rain plastering Rachel's hair to her face and neck. Preston's shirt clung to his chest, and water dripped from the brim of his hat. There's a lined shack just over that rise, Preston said, pointing. We can wait out the worst of it there. Hand in hand, they ran through the downpour to the small structure. It was a simple one-room cabin used by ranch hands when working far sections of the property, just 4 walls, a bed, a small stove, and some basic supplies. Preston got a fire going in the stove while Rachel wrung water from her skirt, shivering in the cool air. Here, Preston said, pulling a rough blanket from a shelf. It's not much, but it's dry. Rachel accepted it gratefully, wrapping it around her shoulders. Preston added wood to the stove, building the fire higher until warmth began to fill the small space. Your clothes are soaked through, he observed. You'll catch your death if you don't get dry. Rachel knew he was right, but the implications made her flush. Turn around, she said finally. Preston obliged, facing the wall as Rachel quickly removed her sodden dress, leaving only her chemise and petticoat. She wrapped the blanket tightly around herself. You can turn back now. And you should get out of those wet clothes too. Preston hesitated, then nodded. With his back to her again, he stripped off his shirt and hung it near the stove. His undershirt was damp but not soaked, so he left it on, though it did little to hide the muscled contours of his chest and shoulders. They sat side by side on the edge of the narrow bed, listening to the rain pound on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. The small shack was warming up, but Rachel couldn't stop shivering more from the intensity of Preston's proximity than from cold. "When I was a boy," Preston said suddenly, "my father would tell us that thunderstorms were God's way of reshaping the world, clearing out the old to make way for the new." Rachel smiled faintly. "My mother said they were angels bowling in heaven." Preston chuckled. "I like that." A comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of tension was building. "Preston," Rachel said softly, "what you said at my farm, about recognizing something in me that first day, I meant it." She turned to look at him, finding his face closer than she expected. "I felt it too, but I was afraid. I still am." "Of what?" "Of feeling again. Of losing again." Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Of betraying Thomas's memory." Preston's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "Do you think Thomas would want you to be alone forever?" Rachel thought of her husband, his kindness, his laughter, his love for her and their son. "No," she admitted. "He wouldn't. He once made me promise that if anything happened to him, I wouldn't shut myself away from life. A wise man. He was." Rachel squeezed Preston's hand. "But it's not just about Thomas. It's about me. Am I ready? Can I trust my heart again?" "Only you can answer that," Preston said gently. "All I can tell you is that I'm willing to wait until you know." Rachel looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the patience, and something else, a longing that matched her own. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned forward until her lips met his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question rather than a declaration. But when Preston's arms encircled her, pulling her closer, Rachel felt something within her unfurl, a part of herself she'd thought had died with Thomas. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you." Rachel smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. "I'm glad you waited until I was ready to want it too." Outside, the storm began to ease, the thunderclaps growing more distant. But inside the small line shack, something new had just begun, fragile and hopeful, like the first green shoots after a long winter. By the time they returned to the ranch house, soaked but smiling, Rachel had made a decision. She would lease her land to the Jenkins family, as Preston had suggested, but she wouldn't sell. Not yet. She needed time to see where this new path might lead before closing the door on her past completely. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and tentative courtship. Preston was respectful of Rachel's position as his employee, maintaining propriety in front of the ranch hands and townsfolk. But in private moments, rides across the property, quiet evenings on the porch, walks in the garden, Rachel had coaxed into flourishing. They grew closer, sharing stories, dreams, and increasingly tender embraces. Victoria Harrington returned to Boston after a week's visit, but not before giving Rachel a knowing smile and a whispered, "He's a good man. Don't let him get away." As summer gave way to early autumn, the ranch prospered under Preston's guidance. The first cattle sales exceeded expectations, and he began making improvements to the property: a new barn, expanded corrals, and plans for a larger bunkhouse to accommodate the growing workforce. Rachel's role evolved too. While she still managed the household, Preston increasingly sought her input on ranch decisions, valuing her practical experience and innate understanding of the land. They made a good team, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. One crisp September evening, Preston suggested a ride to watch the sunset from a ridge overlooking the property. Rachel readily agreed, and they set out together, the air carrying the first hint of fall coolness. The view from the ridge was spectacular: rolling grasslands stretching to distant mountains, the ranch buildings nestled in the valley below, cattle dotting the landscape like dark specks on green velvet. "It's beautiful," Rachel said, dismounting to stand at the edge of the ridge. "You've accomplished so much in such a short time." Preston joined her, taking her hand in his. "We have. I couldn't have done it without you, Rachel." "Of course you could have," she contradicted gently. "You had this vision long before you met me." "The vision, yes, but not the heart of it." Preston turned to face her fully. "You've brought life to this place and to me in ways I never imagined. The sincerity in his voice made Rachel's throat tighten with emotion. "Preston, let me finish." He took both her hands in his. "When I first saw you in that pawn shop, trying to sell your wedding dress, something told me our paths were meant to cross. I didn't understand it then, but I do now." To Rachel's astonishment, Preston dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Rachel Whitfield, I love you. Not just for your strength or your kindness or your remarkable ability to turn a house into a home. I love you for the way you've opened your heart again despite your losses. For your courage in facing each day. For the person you are and the person you helped me to be." Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as Preston continued. "I know it hasn't been a full year since Thomas passed, and if you need more time, I understand. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, I want to make this official. I want you as my wife, my partner in everything. Not my employee or my housekeeper, but my equal in all things." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. This moment, so hoped for yet still unexpected, left her momentarily speechless. Preston reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a single, perfect diamond that caught the light of the setting sun. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "My mother saved it for me, said I should give it to the woman who captured my heart completely." Rachel looked from the ring to Preston's hopeful face, tears flowing freely now. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Preston rose and pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. As they held each other, the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a fitting backdrop to the new beginning they'd just embraced. They rode back to the ranch house in companionable silence, both processing the magnitude of the step they'd taken. At the porch, Preston helped Rachel dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. "There's something I want to ask you," he said as they stood in the golden lights spilling from the windows. "That first day, when I bought back your wedding dress, I said something that might have seemed strange." Rachel nodded, remembering. "You said you wanted me to wear it for you someday." "I did." Preston's eyes were serious. "Would you consider it? Not to replace your memories of Thomas, but to honor them while creating something new with me." The request touched Rachel deeply. It wasn't jealousy or possession that motivated Preston's words, but a profound understanding of how the past shapes the present without diminishing the possibility of future joy. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I would like that very much." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek. Most townspeople responded with genuine happiness for the couple, though a few raised eyebrows at the relatively short time since Thomas's passing. Rachel found she cared less about such judgments than she might have expected. "Life is too short to measure grief by a calendar," she told Preston when he expressed concern about the gossip. "Thomas would understand. In fact, I think he would approve of you." They set a date for late October, allowing time for Preston's sister and her family to travel from Pennsylvania for the ceremony. Rachel spent the weeks before the wedding balancing her usual duties with preparations for their married life. One significant change was moving her few possessions from her homestead to the ranch house. Though she'd been living there as an employee, making it her permanent home required a different perspective. Preston encouraged her to make any changes she desired to the house, wanting it to reflect both their tastes. "It should be our home, not just mine that you're moving into," he insisted. The Jenkins family had taken over the lease of her farm, paying a fair price that gave Rachel some independent funds. She used a portion to purchase new curtains and linens for the ranch house, small touches that blended her past with their future. The night before the wedding, Rachel sat alone in her room, the velvet box containing her wedding dress open before her. The ivory silk gleamed in the lamplight, still beautiful despite the years that had passed since she first wore it. Running her fingers over the delicate beadwork, Rachel was surprised to find that the memories it evoked were tender rather than painful. Her marriage to Thomas had been a blessing, cut short by tragedy, but no less meaningful for its brevity. Tomorrow, she would honor that past even as she stepped into a new future with Preston. A soft knock at her door drew her attention. "Rachel? May I come in?" "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," she called back, smiling despite herself. I'm not looking to test fate, Preston replied through the door. I just wanted to give you something. Curious, Rachel closed the dress box and moved to open the door, careful to keep it mostly shut as she peered around it. Preston stood in the hallway, a small package in his hands. For tomorrow, he said, passing it to her. Rachel accepted the gift, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. Thank you. Should I open it now? Please. Stepping back, but leaving the door ajar, Rachel unwrapped the package. Inside was a delicate lace veil, the craftsmanship exquisite and clearly expensive. Preston, she breathed, lifting it carefully. It's beautiful. I thought it might complement your dress. Something new to go with something treasured. The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Rachel's eyes. It's perfect. Like you, Preston said softly. Get some rest, Rachel. Tomorrow begins the rest of our lives. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the October air carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. The ceremony was to be held at the ranch, with the reception following in the large barn that had been transformed with lanterns, autumn flowers, and white bunting. Rachel prepared in what had been her room, assisted by Preston's sister, Elizabeth, who had arrived the previous day. The two women had taken an immediate liking to each other, Elizabeth's warm practicality reminiscent of Rachel's own mother. Preston hasn't stopped smiling since we arrived, Elizabeth commented as she helped Rachel with the tiny buttons of the wedding dress. I've never seen my brother so happy. He's made me happy too, Rachel replied, smoothing the silk over her hips. The dress fit as perfectly as it had 3 years ago. After Thomas died, I never thought I'd feel this way again. Elizabeth squeezed her shoulder gently. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. They're the last button. Let's add the veil. With the delicate lace secured in her copper hair, which Elizabeth had arranged in an elegant twist, Rachel turned to the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was both familiar and knew the same person who had worn this dress before, but with eyes that held different dreams now. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Judge Harrington, who had agreed to escort Rachel in the absence of her father. The older man's eyes widened appreciatively when he saw her. My dear, you are a vision, he said, offering his arm. Preston is a fortunate man indeed. I'm the fortunate one, Rachel replied, taking his arm with a steady hand. The ceremony was held on the wide front porch of the ranch house, with guests gathered on the lawn before it. As Rachel walked toward Preston, who waited with the minister at the top of the steps, she felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. Preston's face as he watched her approach was a study in wonder and love. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, he whispered, You wore it for me. For both of us, Rachel replied softly. For what was and what will be. The minister's words washed over them as they stood hand in hand, but Rachel would always remember the moment they exchanged vows, promises spoken with clear voices and unwavering certainty. When Preston slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, she felt the final piece of her new life click into place. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. Mr. Xavier, you may kiss your bride. Preston's kiss was gentle yet full of promise, a perfect beginning to their marriage. As they turned to face their cheering guests, Rachel caught sight of her wedding dress, gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Once a symbol of a dream ended too soon, it had become instead a bridge between past and future, honoring what came before while embracing all that lay ahead. The reception lasted well into the evening, with food, dancing, and the warm wishes of friends and neighbors. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the barn, casting a golden glow over the celebrations. During a pause in the dancing, Preston drew Rachel outside, where the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Happy? He asked, his arm around her waist. Rachel leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. More than I thought possible. I made you a wedding gift, Preston said, guiding her toward the corral. It's not quite finished yet, but I wanted you to see it tonight. Inside the corral stood a new buggy, its black paint gleaming, with red wheels and polished brass fittings. It was finer than any Rachel had ever owned, built for both practicality and comfort. Preston, it's wonderful, she exclaimed, running her hand along the smooth wooden seat. For trips to town, visiting neighbors, wherever you want to go, Preston said. I know how much you value your independence. This is yours." The gift was so perfectly thoughtful, acknowledging her need for autonomy, even as they joined their lives, that Rachel felt her heart might burst with love for this man who understood her so well. "Thank you," she said simply, reaching up to kiss him. "For everything." Later that night, as they stood alone in what was now their bedroom, Rachel felt a moment of shyness. Though they had shared kisses and embraces during their courtship, this new intimacy was uncharted territory. Preston seemed to sense her hesitation. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly, taking her hand. "Nothing needs to happen that you're not ready for." Rachel's love for him deepened at these words. "I am ready," she assured him. "Just a little nervous." "So am I," Preston admitted with a smile that melted her heart. It's not every day a man gets to begin forever with the woman he loves. With gentle hands, he helped her remove the wedding dress, treating the garment with the reverence it deserved. As it was carefully laid aside, Rachel felt the last vestiges of her old life transforming into the foundation of the new one. In the warm darkness of their room, Preston and Rachel discovered each other fully for the first time, a joining of bodies that mirrored the union of their hearts and lives. Their coming together was tender and passionate, a promise of all the days and nights that would follow. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness, Rachel rested her head on Preston's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Rachel smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking about that day in the pawn shop. How close I came to losing my wedding dress, and how finding you changed everything." Preston's arms tightened around her. "The moment I saw you standing there, trying so hard to be strong while your world was falling apart, I knew I had to help if I could. I never imagined where it would lead." "To this," Rachel said softly. "To us." "To us," Preston agreed, kissing the top of her head. "And to all the tomorrows we'll share." Outside their window, a shooting star streaked across the Montana sky, a fleeting moment of brilliance in the vast darkness. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Rachel and Preston had found a light that would endure, illuminating the path before them as they walked it together. Epilogue: 3 years later, Preston Xavier stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching as Preston rode in from the north pasture, their 2-year-old son Thomas waving excitedly beside her. "Papa, Papa," the boy called, his copper hair so like his mother's gleaming in the summer sunlight. Preston dismounted with a grin, scooping the child into his arms. "There's my cowboy. Have you been helping your mama today?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "I fed chickens." He did indeed, Rachel confirmed, accepting Preston's kiss. "And collected 3 eggs all by himself. That's my boy." Preston set Thomas down, watching fondly as he ran to show his father the toy horse waiting on the porch steps. Rachel leaned against her husband's side, his arm automatically circling her waist. The years had been good to them. The Xavier Ranch had flourished, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Rachel's former homestead, still leased to the Jenkins family, provided additional income that she had used to establish a small lending library in Willow Creek. But their greatest joy stood before them now, playing with wooden horses and chattering about his morning adventures. "How are you feeling?" Preston asked quietly, his hand moving to rest protectively over Rachel's slightly rounded stomach. "Wonderful," she replied truthfully. The morning sickness that had plagued her early in this second pregnancy had finally subsided. "Dr. Bennett says everything looks perfect." "And what does mother's intuition say about this one?" Preston asked with a smile. "Another boy?" Rachel shook her head. "A girl, I think. Strong-willed, like her father." "Heaven help us," Preston laughed. "One stubborn Xavier is quite enough." "I married him anyway," Rachel teased, earning another kiss. That evening, after Thomas was tucked into bed with stories of brave cowboys and wild mustangs, Rachel and Preston sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. These quiet moments at day's end had become a cherished ritual, a time to share thoughts and plans. "I was thinking," Preston said, his fingers idly playing with Rachel's hair, "we should plan a trip east next spring, after the baby comes. My sister is desperate to meet Thomas, and my mother isn't getting any younger." "I'd like that," Rachel replied. though the thought of traveling with two little ones is somewhat daunting. We'll manage, Preston assured her. We always do. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the gentle creaking of the swing and the distant lowing of cattle. Do you ever think about that day? Rachel asked suddenly. In the pawn shop? Preston nodded. More often than you might imagine. How different our lives might have been if I hadn't walked through that door at that exact moment. I like to think we would have found each other anyway, Rachel said softly. That some things are meant to be. Preston's arm tightened around her shoulders. Like us. Like us, Rachel agreed, resting her head against his chest. Inside the house, carefully preserved in a cedar chest in their bedroom, lay Rachel's wedding dress, a symbol of endings that became beginnings, of love lost and found again. She had worn it twice now, for two good men who had shaped her life in different ways. And perhaps someday, many years hence, their daughter might wear it too, continuing the story that had begun with a desperate widow, a compassionate cowboy, and a dress that was so much more than silk and lace. Under the vast Montana sky, Preston and Rachel Xavier held each other close, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had made them whole again.